and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another Album of the Week video. This is episode number 245. And so for today's episode, I am here to celebrate the 40th anniversary for At War with Satan, the third consecutive studio album for the blacksmiths of black metal, Venom. Originally released on April 16th, 1984 via Neat Records. And of course, even Combat a year later, and so forth. So let's lay down our souls to the gods rock and roll, and let's begin. After raising carnage in the wake of their rise with both 1981's Welcome to Hell and 1982's Black Metal, with the title and recording values pretty much laid down the foundations for what would become the subgenre. And with plenty of prime classic 7-inch singles, for better or worse, Venom was creating a buzz like no one had ever imagined. However, with the rise of bands like Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax, who had cited Venom as being an influence for creating another soon-to-be huge subgenre known as thrash metal, Venom were obviously fixated on pouring more napalm into the burning pits of hell, with not just a couple more 7-inch singles, but an album that was teased all the way back with their iconic second album that would prove to be pretty ambitious creatively. Once again being recorded at Neat Records' infamous Impulse Studios, with the band itself producing it, along with, of course, for the ride, again, Martin Smith and Keith Nickel, both serving as engineers and mixers. At least 13 tracks were recorded to my knowledge, though I've always questioned if the track Bitch Witch was actually recorded during these sessions, because of how similar the recording and production styles sound to these, instead of the production and recording style to like Welcome to Hell that it was made a bonus track for, or black metal for that matter too. Either way, 7 tracks were ultimately chosen, with the remaining songs being used as, well, songs for exclusive 7-inch singles, like in the case with Warhead, which was released in January 20th, 1984, which contains both Lady Lust and 7 Gates of Hell. Then, of course, there is Manitou, which would be released pretty much in October of 1984, just a few or so months after the release of this album. And this 7-inch single contains both Woman and Dead of Night, and Dead of Night was pretty much exclusive to the 12-inch version of for Manitou, just like in the case for Warhead, where 7 Gates of Hell was found exclusive to. Finally, by April 16th, 1984, At War with Satan was released. So, featuring 7 tracks, clocking at the length of 39 minutes and 39 seconds, these 7 tracks are, kicking off with the epic length title track, then into Rip Ride, Genocide, Cry Wolf, Stand Up, parentheses, and Be Counted, Women, Leather, and Hell, and then ending with the rather novelty, very goofy, just screw around the studio track that is titled Arg. And there you go. There's your 7 tracks for At War with Satan. So, with At War with Satan, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the band definitely had a lot of high hopes for this album, especially for the ambitions, surrounding the concept of the album in general, being one side being one epic length track that told a story, and then the second half just being basically a random Venom album. And with this being the beginning of the burgeoning speed metal and thrash metal, with the beginnings of Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax, and even eventually leading into like Exodus and Megadeth and so on, there's definitely was a lot to satisfy here. And there's no doubt that it definitely did satisfy certain part, or at least sections of their fans. But I think in a way it also kind of perplexed certain fans as well, and it might have been seen as the, let's say, the beginning of the end for Venom's, I guess you can say, their day in the sun. You can definitely say that Venom had their high hopes for this one. And while it did serve to be ambitious, it did sort of test its audience listening patience here. Most notably with the Mammoth title track, which serves as Venom's longest song to date, clocking in barely under 20 minutes, which is the crux of the album's creative story. A song centered on a character named Abaddon, also the alias of Tony Bray, Venom's drummer, or former drummer, or whatever, and of course these days, former Venom Inc. drummer, who is the guardian to the gates of hell. According to Kronos, he started writing this story as a wee kid in his school days, and the story is about how hell revolts and takes over the heavens and throws God into hell. The track's imagery and storyline largely evokes the Book of Revelation and John Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost, basically from the years, or at least between the years, 1667 to 1674, filtered through a postmodern horror movie and pulp aesthetic. Again, these are also quotes taken from the Wikipedia page. Yes, cheating here, folks. As for the song's progressive artistry, it's largely inspired by Rush's 2112, which Kronos has cited as one of his favorite albums. It's a fascinating song that I've always admired, but at the same time, it never personally gripped me, and I pretty much would ignore it in favor of some of the album's other songs, or even the songs that got used exclusively for the 7-inch singles. But over time, and most recently in preparation for this episode, it has immensely grown on me. It has its charming qualities to it. I don't think it's a masterpiece by any means, but it's far from a disaster. The intentions were obviously there, but I think its setback is the tedious structuring and somewhat repetitiveness that I feel holds it back from being basically just an epic juggernaut, and I think it just keeps it held back from being one. With that ends this album's storyline concept, because just like with Rush's 2112 album, the remaining 6 songs here, it just becomes a standard Venom album. And this is the second half of the album. This is when, again, for all of you who have probably first played this on vinyl, this is where pretty much what takes the most part, all of the second side of this album. And these songs are, for the most part, are just fine selections of what makes Venom, Venom. These are raw, raucous, rough, no frills, in-your-face songs whose only purpose serving this album is to satisfy the fans for sticking through the epic long title track that took up the entire side A. Now, I wouldn't call these songs classic Venom songs by any means, because, I hate to say it, if you see either Kronos' version of Venom or Venom Inc., which again is basically the Tony Dolan sort of era Venom that is represented, and therefore having Tony Dolan and Jeff Mantis done, these songs barely get touched. At least from this period, that usually will get touched upon. It's either Seven Gates of Hell or even Warhead, which were left off of this album. So that should tell you something here. Now, that's not to say that these particular songs are bad. They are still enjoyable in their own right. I do find Rip Ride, Genocide, and Cry Wolf to be, let's say, true standouts here. Both Rip Ride and Genocide are bangers, and Cry Wolf shows off Mantis's musical flexibility, throwing in some Eddie Van Halen-ish guitar tapping in the beginning of, let's say, this song's sort of intro before turning into a very fine mid-paced rocker. Of course, the album ends in a typical Venom fashion with Arg. The band uses this track as a cheaply way to kick at the dead corpse of disco music, to just be, well, an excuse to just be noisy and chaotic in the studio. Still, for the remainder of the album, it's still pretty fine. I think in the end, what this album's purpose is that what should be seen as is a one-half sort of a conceptual album, and basically one second half is just a standard Venom album that, for the most part, is pretty much full of deep cuts. And so, when it comes to, and again, with Venom, we're seen as a part of the new wave of British heavy metal movement. A lot of Venom's classics, for the most part, were 7-inch singles. And I think that ended up being the real big case for At War with Satan, is that the 7-inch singles that came in the wake of this album have become much more bigger songs than the songs that were used for this album. And so, in many ways, you practically are getting an album full of deep cuts. And for those that probably haven't heard most of these songs get, let's say, played to death, it does serve as a real cool, unique listen. But if you're really finding any sort of essential Venom, this is kind of where everything begins to fall short. And I think this is what leads to the somewhat very slow, hard demise of Venom's popularity. And that's not really to say anything really bad about Venom. It's just, well, it kind of just ended up being that way because of, well, as again, it will be explained. So there you have it. At War with Satan. An album that it still laid a pretty good foundation and gave at least its fans at least something to still at least sink their teeth into, but I think the signs were kind of there that things were kind of starting to kind of be ran on autopilot, and therefore the aura for Venom was beginning to kind of wear off, and eventually it would lead the way for a lot of the other bands that were coming in the wake of Venom's rise, with Metallica against Slayer, Anthrax, Dark Angel, Exodus, Megadeth, and etc., etc. We're going to come around and just dethrone Venom as being basically the godfathers of extreme metal, but I think that is a deserving template or crowning achievement for Venom, but it just would kind of knock them off the mountain and basically just lead to basically the end of the popularity for Venom is a good word I'm trying to, to blurt out of my mouth there. Still, it's a good album. I wouldn't necessarily say it's my favorite album for Venom, but it's definitely still, I think, one of the last key albums within Venom's discography. But again, I actually prefer the 7-inch singles that kind of came in the wake of at war with Satan. So there you have it. But still, 40 years, 40th anniversary, it's still a great achievement here, and it is still worth celebrating. And so for those who have at least spent years just sinking their teeth into Venom, and especially this album, and if you were there, again, you know what to do. But still, if you obviously are very familiar and have obviously, let's say, might have hold this album within some sort of high degree or maybe a low degree. That meaning, if your thoughts are either positive or negative, you can leave them all down in the comment section below. But if you are one of those who have yet to basically lay down your soul to the gods rock and roll, that being the Blacksmiths of black metal, the band that gave birth to extreme metal, if you have yet to at least dive into this band's discography, please do. Without Venom, well, some of this stuff wouldn't even exist. Therefore, without some of the bands beforehand, Motorhead, Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Deep Purple, and etc., wouldn't be here if it for Venom. You know, Venom wouldn't be here without those bands, is what I'm trying to get at. So, there it is. It's still worth checking out. So, until then, this is Heavy Thrash saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.